Hi, everybody. My name is Darwin Ling. I'm the general partner and founder of a VC fund called Good AI Capital. We are early stage VC AI fund that have a very sector focus. We want to see how AI being applied towards different industry. So we invest heavily in healthcare and enterprise as well as automation. And then by enterprise, anything that is from cybersecurity to infrastructure, and we would not be interested in any consumer applications. But for automation, we focus on robotics, autonomous driving, as well as drones. So we have a very interesting name. Our name is called Good AI Capital. So the good really stems from what we call a mission-driven investment thesis. We believe in doing well by doing good. So I think I heard Alan mention that, you're very interested, and this is our mission. So we are a team. We are not an investment professional. We're a team of scientists. We're a team of entrepreneurs. We're a team of founders. We are healthcare practitioners. So we hail from Stanford, Berkeley, and that little company called Palantir. My co-founder is actually an airline engineer from Palantir. Zoom, Eli Lilly, and GE Healthcare. These are the kind of the industry background that we came from. So again, we believe in building the startup ecosystem, and great startups do not come just from money. It has to have a foster strong industrial partnerships, and that's why we have these names as part of our partners. That is co-investing in us with startup companies. So we're in Fund 2 now. The Fund 2 is 40 million. So we have Fund 1 came from our vintage year 2021. It's a small fund. It's what we call an MVP or prototype fund. But we have a great track record already. So we've invested in 7 companies. We have 2 exits out of that vintage year. One of them is one M&A, and the other one is an IPO. So on the right, I actually kind of mentioned this company called Robotics. You might have seen the ticker symbol that is showing up on the CNBC. So we are one of the early investors in the company. So we co-investor in the company with Uber as well as NVIDIA. So that what they do is that they want to provide a sustainable level 4 self-driving food delivery robot. So essentially, instead of having a human to deliver Uber Eats, they will have robots to do the delivery. So like I mentioned, NVIDIA is actually co-investing in the company, but NVIDIA is such a behemoth, they didn't actually disclose in the SEC filing. So on the day, actually, in the last quarter, they disclosed that in the SEC filing that they only invest $5 million in a company. But because of that, the stock price popped 800% or 700% in one day. So we're lucky to be part of it. So let's look at this. Talk a lot about NVIDIA. So this is a very interesting event that took place on January 27, 2025. So these are the NVIDIA actually suffered the most single-day market cap loss in history. Well, if you look at the list here, NVIDIA was on that list a lot. There's Broadcom, there's Meta, and Microsoft there. So there's a drop of $598 billion on one day. Give or take, call it $600 billion. And that represents a 17% drop in their stock price on that day. So what happened there? What's kind of seismic event that took place on that day? Yeah. And that's actually what my next slide is going to talk about. So DeepSeek's rise in AI. So let's talk about what exactly is DeepSeek. So some of you are probably very familiar with it. So it's an open source AI model. One of the key things is that essentially they're competing with ChatGPT, Anthropic, and Llama. One of the key differentiations that it has is that it has this thing called advanced reasoning capabilities. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. What exactly does that mean? So another interesting thing is we talk a lot about the whole rise of China. And this project is started by a gentleman called Ling, and then he actually is a hedge fund manager. He runs an AI hedge fund manager. We talk about AI quant, trading and all that. He does that. And that's actually a successful kind of hedge fund in China. So Marty, I can maybe connect you to this guy to be your next panel.
I'm looking to talk to our next.
Okay. Okay. So essentially he was like, this is something where he's very interested in, then he started accumulating the NVIDIA chips back in 2021 and try to figure out how to build out this AI model. And I'm going to have a chance to talk about exactly the journey, how we arrived towards this project here. So what exactly is DeepSeek? Why is it matters here? So DeepSeek R1 is their latest model. And on the left-hand side, you see that's kind of like pie chart comparison here. So what that does is that actually its performance in terms of the accuracy that is come up with is actually on par, and even in some cases exceed the OpenAI O1 model here. So there's a lot of fine details that you can take a look at that. Not only that, actually, in terms of because of this capability of reasoning, it's trying to also, in terms of performances, efficiency, and scalability, it also beats OpenAI in this model here. And that's actually the one that actually kind of creating this sudden market panic that, you hear that, companies, people putting billions of money into data center, and how do they spend that money? They want to buy chip from NVIDIA. But now that I can have this kind of low-cost model, very cost-efficient, scalable model, why do I need to spend another $1 billion to buy NVIDIA chips anymore? So that's actually causing the panic on that day. Okay. And then, of course, there's the third category is that, at least there's no proof yet, but they said, the DeepSeek is able to build up this AI model with only $6 million. Well, these things are yet to be verified, but, how do they, so that's actually the panic that comes at like, while you're here. Yeah, go ahead.
So Kai had mentioned earlier he thinks many AIs will become commoditized. Do you think these types of DeepSeek?
Yes.
Are you in agreement with that? Can you talk about that?
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. So I think I'm gonna cover that. So the idea is that
isn't it the case that the DeepSeek actually use trained models and they just upgraded it? So they actually used models that have already been trained.
yes.
And so that's the only way they got the efficiency. But if you start from a brand new LLM, there would be as much training as required. Correct?
That's actually one of the more detailed discussion that I'm going to talk about how they actually arrived at this cost efficiency model here. But yeah, you're right, absolutely. They have trained this. They have this process called distillation that allows you to basically learn from the best and then dwindle down into a smaller model here. Okay, so I will cover that in more detail. So let's just go with it. So why is it? I think it's a myth that is this thing real? So DeepSeek, other than the fact that all this, GitHub repository they put out there, or the document that they write and all that. So there are essentially three key innovations that is actually supporting why DeepSeek is such a disruptor in this case here. So the first thing, what we call chain of thought reasoning, and I'm going to talk more about it in the next slide here. But the next one is also a revolution learning techniques. It's called reinforcement learning. So it's an AI technique that basically build up the training model by learning, or actually from other feedbacks, whether from a human or from a AI by itself. And I'm going to give an example later on to talk about what that means here. And the third one is, I think, pertaining to this general structure, that essentially they are using an idea called distillation order, the distillation. So that they try to how to learn from a much bigger model should bring it down to a much smaller model. And that's how they actually learn from the best here. So let's go for the details, each one here. So, yeah.
DeepSeek is not chip. It's not software.
It is software.
It is software.
Yeah. It's an AI model. Well, it's an AI model. So when you type ChatGPT, you're talking to a chatbot, right? So DeepSeek also has a chatbot. You can type and talk to it. In fact, this is a session that I'm trying to show you here. But So it's a piece of software that's running in a cloud somewhere or in your laptop or whatnot. So, but this is actually the disruptor, context behind it. So this long kind of like sessions here that you see on the screen essentially is an interaction of DeepSeek with a human. You can see that some of you, how many of you have actually used ChatGPT? Okay, everybody has, right? So usually you want to ask ChatGPT, say, hey, find me the recipe of, cooking a Thanksgiving dinner or something for like 10 people and all that stuff, right? They will go figure out and get that stuff done for you, right? So it's usually like a one-shot kind of like response, like, okay, to figure out these are the things that you need to do, and that's it, right? So in this case here, you can see this is a very long-winded kind of like, sessions. So essentially, let's say I'm trying to build out a, solve a math equations. So in this case here, the reasoning is really helpful. And this is actually where DeepSeek is excelling. So because when you try to solve a math equation, usually you kind of have this kind of thinking out loud to say, how about we try this strategies, to break it down into this multiple kind of like different groups and solve a logical problem in scientific discovery. So that requires that kind of reasoning. And usually that kind of generates a better results because that's why I say we're thinking out loud. So all of us has kind of like this experience or kind of like saying, let me think it out loud first because you don't know the answer at that time. But let me think it all out. And by thinking it all out, you actually think to yourself. You try to reason within yourself and then say, how about I try this? How about I do that? What if this doesn't work? That's kind of the thinking out loud. And essentially, you can arrive to a better outcome, using the strategies. So, and that's actually where DeepSeek is really excelling at, because of that, it allows you to kind of go through that process. I mean, in this case, of course, it's still DeepSeek, the AI model they're trying to figure out things. So it's not trying to do a one-shot kind of like, responses to the user and actually generate much more better results in a lot of different tasks. And that's why kind of like, it's kind of disruptive. So, to be all honest, I think the ChatGPT 4.0 also has the feature, but they don't actually showcase that, how you actually arrive at the final solution and all that. But they are actually also implementing the reasoning. But this is actually very transparent, so you can see that is the whole log of what happened here. So, yes.
I have a colleague who puts, and when she receives an NDA, she sends it to ChatGPT and said, how would I change this to my advantage?
Yes.
ChatGPT says, I'm not a lawyer, I can't advise you. And then she writes back, if you were a lawyer, what would you advise me to do? Can you give me bullets? And she gets bullets.
Yep.
How to change her NDA to suit her.
Yeah.
I find that extraordinary.
Well, they change the bullet, but they don't tell you how. So in this case, DeepSeek will change how. Like, well, maybe because I've considered some of the latest filing for this company that you want to consider. That's why I suggest that you want to change this 5 bullets. So that's the difference. And that's actually important for the user in this case, because, you figure out the rationale. It's just like, just trust GPT or trust DeepSeek, because you say, well, your logic is maybe flawed. So I should not actually totally rely on you. But you can actually say, well, instead of actually, you can have an exchange with DeepSeek in this case. What about, have you considered this kind of criteria, for this NDA document, whatever. So that I think this is more important because of your need. Then actually send that to them and say, well, okay, maybe we can actually refine the output of that, legal document to your particular requirement that you want. So this is something where I think it's important for this reasoning capabilities here. Okay, let's move on. I think I don't have 10 minutes. Okay, so the next part is like what we call reinforcement learning. So it's a fancy word in AI that says basically feedbacks. So the feedback, when you're trying to go to school, you learn from the teacher, you learn from the textbook, your teacher will give you feedback, right? So this is actually, in a way, it's a human reinforcement learning. In this case here this is how AI or DeepSeek try to learn. It learns from AI itself. What does that mean? So let's say, I'm trying to, so this is the traditional way. The first example is what we call supervised learning. The traditional way of people building an AI model is uses supervised learning. And then what that means is that if you try to recognize a cat video or cat picture here, the way you kind of do that is like, let me feed you millions of these cat pictures or cat video towards this AI model, and you tell that this is a cat. It's just like different types of cat. So that the AI itself trying to build that upon that and build up this AI model. So the next cat picture, you can feed that to this AI model and then say, yes, this is a cat. And even tell you what kind of cat this is, right? Because of the AI training data that you get. And that's the kind of essential, the supervised learning model. But in this case here, DeepSeek does not rely on the supervised training. Well, there's still some of them, but they rely this learning feedback mechanism. The feedback mechanism is like they use a reward-based mechanism. So basically, it's like, I'm not going to tell you the answer whether this is a cat or not. I'm trying to let you figure it out and use a reward system to tell you that yes, if you kind of getting closer, the fact that it's a cat, that the AI will say, yeah, I'll give you a little bit more reward. And also notice that there's also like a format reward. What that means is like this thinking out loud process is coming in like just because you kind of document like your thought process, is that I'm going to give you credit for doing that. Remember when we in high school or school, when we learn math, the math teacher will say, make sure you show your steps so that you can get partial credits. And that's exactly what they're doing. Okay. So, and that's actually the self-learning model as opposed to relying on the humans. On the other side, yeah, this is a cat. The supervised learning, in a way, it's a human that's a distant cat. So let's jump to that.
That will never tell you what it's actually doing, right? It'll merely tell you the ways.
Yes. Yes. That's the kind of like good explanation of what exactly the strategy is doing. Of course, behind that is a map, 2,000 parameters map equations that kind of represent that. So the third ring was distillation. So it's like we talk about large language model and small language model. Well, actually, I haven't talked about it yet. But the idea is that, if you want to build a, LLM or large language model, you don't need to know every single text in the world where, the llama or, OpenAI. I don't need to care about, all the Shakespeare, content from, the last, when they try to integrate the movie script and all that. So all we care is something where I said, I very care about this, small model that actually allow me to take the best of the best from, learn from the best. So basically say I can learn from the reasoning capability and kind of dumb down into a smaller model. We talk about the DeepSeek R1, which is 670 billion parameters. We go down to a llama, which is 7 billion. So actually in that case here, you learn from the best and you create a kind of variation based on the llama and then learn from the reasoning capabilities. So now you can actually much smaller language model that you can actually use. And the kind of like, the result is that basically we have this thing called small language model. You don't necessarily need to build a large language model. You actually are very tailored to actually a small language model that is tailored for your own needs. And, I'm going to give an example in the healthcare example later. So this is an open source victory because I think I talked about this as open source. And there's an idea called inference compute. So we talk about all this training. The training that happens is actually all this, $1 billion Stargate project that needs to take place in, $500 billion investment. But now every single thing that takes care when you try to talk to DeepSeek and talk to even like the ChatGPT is what they call inference. The inference basically is like, I'm going to just figure out, the results for you. And that's actually takes time. And that's actually not running on the big and powerful NVIDIA chips, but actually there has to be, you can run it on, you can still run on a powerful NVIDIA chip, but you have alternative. Now you can actually run it on a less powerful chips. And that's actually open up a new market because of the capability of what DeepSeek can do here. So the quote is, Satya Nadella, CEO of Microsoft, mentioned that DeepSeek's model is super impressive in reducing computational costs. And that's what they talk about is the inference compute here. Okay, so innovations and opportunities. We talk about, this idea called small language model. It's SLM. It's not LLM anymore. So if you don't remember anything after this conference today, remember SLM. This is the next innovations that are coming up. For enterprise, because, think enterprise, meaning there's non-consumer. But, let's say I'm a doctor, running, a clinics that I want to care about building an AI model. All I care is really for my patient's record that I can do like the EHR records on all this, predictions and workflow analysis and all that. Why do I need this large language model? So that's kind of the example that I want to give. And general AI agent, you might have heard of this idea called agents. Agent is actually sort of like another level of applications so that you can build and actually kind of create a workflow that can orchestrate and that coordinate with each other and create this automation. And that's how it's create a new disrupting force for the enterprise. Okay.
Yeah, so I have a quick question. There used to be Moore's Law and computer chips.
Yeah.
Right. And you've been in the business for many years now, or what's considered to be many years. So what's the speed of change right now that you're seeing? So
the speed of change is not so much on the performances. I mean, Moore's Law is about, you're doubling down on transistors every single year. It's still focused on that little chip here, right? So now the Moore's Law is no longer, I don't think it's applicable in this case here, because now it's like, it's not because you're dumping more technology into it and then making it cheaper. It is cheaper now. So I would say in enabling a new set of enterprises or new set of business models that can actually take advantage of it.
It may be the right way to phrase the geometric progression of use cases. Are you seeing that?
Yeah, healthcare. So, the use cases are, but basically healthcare is a kind of older industry. So now that with this thing called AI here, so you can actually, how we can actually use that to enhance a doctor's workflow and decision making. So the idea is that, how can we leverage that smartness that you have, rather than building a recipe for Thanksgiving, now you can actually treat, cancer. What is the next step for, for a doctor? Because cancer treatment is a long term. It's not about just one shot getting a drug to the patient. There's multiple ways that, as a doctor, it's kind of like a plan. Like, how do I do this, right? So think of it as a reasoning, right? So it's like, have you considered this alternative? Have you considered that, kind of like, record? And then also you're bounded by this kind of compliance. Like, well, yeah, that would be a potentially good medication to prescribe. However, due to all this kind of restriction, I cannot prescribe this. Then what do you kind of like consider those factors? And that actually create a very like, this is one example. Like, now it's like productivity. It's not so much about just getting more work done. In this case here, is actually helping a very critical part of work that is having more transparency, smartness, and also like, dealing all this redundancy, dealing with a million of health records, who has time? The doctors are not paid or trained to look at those records, right? Now with AI, that actually will help that. And that's actually, it's not so much about Moore's Law anymore. It's actually, at the end, I think, it's not about, my partner is an ER physician, as a full-time ER physician. He just released an article that says, AI is not going to replace his job any day, but it will make his job much better. And that's actually, he actually used a session about DeepSeek and how he actually treat one of the patients that actually he missed. He feed that cases back to DeepSeek. DeepSeek said, have you considered that? So that, yeah, I didn't consider it. And the reason I didn't consider it, he has a 9-hour shift that day. He didn't, he was tired and all that. But if imagine DeepSeek is alongside when he's trying to look at the patient at that moment, that could have helped quite a bit. So let's go on. So I think with, this topic of this like AI outlook for 2025. So I think I put that. So of course, this week is an interesting week. Other than these, we have tariffs, we have, a lot of things going on, regime and all that. We talk about all that stuff today. Yes, just now. So back last year, so I think NVIDIA has a kind of challenge that the target grip, tightens grip on AI chip exports. So one of the kind of controversial state is like, how does this DeepSeek company get all these NVIDIA chips? They're based in China while you have all this like ban. So that's kind of one of the controversy, what's going on there, right? And then in the latest filing, NVIDIA says, well, yes, it is true, NVIDIA sales to China have dropped 50% in the latest earnings call last Wednesday. So this is happening right now. It's hitting, the headwinds is real. And also trade war, right? So now we have tariffs. And of course, because of the uncertainties that are surrounding but the trade war. So NVIDIA, the CFO mentioned that, well, we don't know what's going to happen. That's what they say. And you say if you're like a $1 trillion company that tell people that we don't know what's going on, that's going to be an issue. So, but that is a real issue that everybody, all of us, has to face here in this room here. So
So do we think NVIDIA can actually keep these chips out of China's hands? I mean, for how long? For 18
well, they just
12
another
months,
news that
18
broke
months?
last week. I think they arrested 3 guys or 3 people company from Singapore. So what happened is that they are basically called a smuggler, called like black market, and then people can even for a Chinese company, a lot of people actually shifted their headquarters to Singapore. That's it. So basically, does that mean Singapore is they're not bounded by this CHIPS Act or whatever the ban, right? But at the end, the money and everything's from China. So that's actually the issues here, right? So the question is that I don't know how effective that could be. So I think the last part, Marty asked me to kind of talk about the US, China, what is the AI landscape between the 2 countries here. So I just kind of looked through, I think one of the interesting things, well, let's talk about DeepSeek since it's on the limelight, right? So the case study here, so a little bit more background. So Liang, the founder, so I talk about it, he's basically a quant hedge fund manager. But he has a vision. He's not about just, I think he's already rich, but from what I heard. But when he's trying to build this DeepSeek, so what they say is that, so I think there's a kind of like a general kind of perception that, all the Chinese tech company, they usually copycat and try to, there's no true innovation. And, they might just lacking confidence and innovation. And that's actually his vision. He want to build something, a true AI leadership within China. It's a very ambitious one, but looks like he made it. It's not because they don't have capital, but actually more so they lack this innovation strategy and actually the talent, organization, the talent. Where do you find all this Stanford graduate, and whatnot, the MIT graduate, to work on this AI thing here? So that's actually, what he's concerned and what is the vision face. And his approach is well, instead of copying somebody, let's actually start with a new architecture from scratch. And that's actually his vision is. And then
Can I just talk to this
Yeah,
for
yeah,
a second? So there's something called the International Student Assessment Program, right? And so China scores 591 on math, which is about the average engineering score to enter a school in the United States in engineering.
I see.
So that's half of all Chinese students score that well.
Okay.
In the United States, only 8% of students score that well.
Okay.
Right? The average score, so China score is 591. The average American score is 478. So it's like SAT scores, right? The average European score is 472. So they're even less than the United States.
Mhm.
So my worldview is that the Chinese have a mathematically more sophisticated culture than the rest of the Western
Yeah.
industrialized world.
Of course. But I think, the idea is that, but yet they are not known for innovation. They're not known for entrepreneurship. So this is the part where how do you kind of bridge the gap? And this is actually what Liang's vision is. Let's try to bridge the gap. And it looks like he succeeded. He hired a lot of these PhDs and graduates, from leading Chinese university. They don't look for university graduate from overseas and all that. Tsinghua, Beida, Peking University. These are the very well-known, the MIT, the Harvard in China. They're all also from those schools. So they have those talents. But more important thing is that this kind of Silicon Valley entrepreneurship interest, that setup, the cultural setup is not there in China. So it's very if you go to a Silicon Valley, startup is like, it's open offices, there's no like manager, everybody's just doing their things, and flat organizations here. So essentially they're trying to do that. So, and the innovation come from individual, not from say top-down manager, the CEO that said, now, should do this and all that, because the same kind of idea where, well, creativity does not come from there. And actually one of the last quote that I think is I did not put it there. So when DeepSeek come out, one of the CEO says Perplexity come out, he go on CNBC and talk about that and said, well, basically the warning is yes, everything is real. These guys are real. And what they say is that there is like necessity is the mother of invention. How many have you heard of this? Okay, so basically, if you don't have much, you become creative, you become entrepreneurial, and I think this is the case here. So they might have $1 billion, we don't know, and all that, but because of that kind of structure, that create this, essentially, and then create a disruptive force on this end here. So it's gonna be like, I think interesting. How long? Not beyond just 2025, and I think it's gonna be the years to come.
Great job, Darwin. Thanks so much.